Hi, good afternoon, good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Sure can.
All right, great. Well,
Thanks, Molly.
thank you all so much for joining us for our Ask Me Anything. We are going to be talking about the difference between brand positioning and value proposition today, and why value prop is so important to having an aligned and engaged sales force or sales team. My name is Nicki Gibbs. I'm Chief Strategy Officer here at Beehive.
And my name is Marie Renckens. I'm a group director here at Beehive.
And Marie and I have worked on a number of these value proposition and sales alignment type projects for a number of our clients across industries, including in healthcare, in education, and professional services specifically, and a few others as well. So we are delighted that you're all here with us today. And before we really jump in, we wanted to talk just a little bit about why value proposition is such an important tool in the communications toolbox. And I think what we have experienced, again, across clients in a number of industries, is there's often a disconnect between what the organization wants to convey in the marketplace and how the sales team is delivering that message or what they're saying. And it can come from any number of sources. It could be that the business is siloed. It could be that there's been a positioning update. The brand has changed or evolved in some way, or new services and capabilities have been introduced, and those messages are not being adopted or embraced by the sales team. The other side of that coin could be that the sales team is feeling unsupported by marketing, that they have something that's working for them in the marketplace, and they don't feel that they're getting support from the marketing team with the right materials, with the right messages that really reinforce what is working for them as they're out in the world selling. So we have had the opportunity to work with a number of clients to say, what is our story? What is our value proposition? And really answer the question, why would a customer or a prospect choose to work with said organization when there are a number of other organizations that do the same thing and competition is continuing to rise? So that's really what we're going to jump into today. And we thought this was a great time to talk about it for two reasons. If you are in higher education, this is a time when students are choosing schools and choosing majors. So great to be thinking about what your story is and how you might help them make a selection. And if you are outside of higher ed, working with a more traditional sales force, likely in January or February, you're going to have that whole team together for some kind of a kickoff for the coming year. And it's a great chance either to share a unifying message or to inquire if all the pieces are in place for what is needed for a really successful 2025. So that is why we're talking about the topic today.
I'll also remind everyone that it is an AMA. So as you have questions throughout the conversation today, drop them in the chat and we'll get to what we can get to. We are not presenting any slides or doing any sort of readout like that. So we really want this to be a good, engaging, and ultimately really helpful conversation. So if you have questions either on what we're talking about or questions related to value prop, drop them in the chat, and that's what we'll dive into today.
Marie, do you want to share an example of some of the work
Sure.
that we've done just to get everybody started?
Yeah, I can talk through a recent example we did, again, in the higher ed space, one of the many spaces that requires this type of work. And that work was with the University of Minnesota, and specifically within their College of Engineering. There's a department and set of majors for civil, environmental, and geoengineering. So kind of a little grouping of majors in there. They came to us because they were experiencing kind of a decline in enrollment. And that enrollment decline was something that they were seeing in national trends. So it wasn't necessarily unique to their situation or to the U of M specifically. But what they were also seeing within the College of Engineering is that these other majors like biomedical engineering or computer science, they were kind of grabbing up a lot of students. So that's where a lot of the students were feeling more drawn to, was that realm of engineering. So they came to us and said, we know we have this great thing to offer. It's really important. The work we do is important. When the students are here, they love it. We have great retention, we have great outcomes, but there's something about our messaging and what we are trying to get out there that just isn't quite resonating. So can you help us figure that out? So we worked with them to obviously, start with some research to understand who is a good fit student for this program, what are some of the outcomes that we can talk about, what is the real value here, and what are those critical components that we can pull through to help them really define what that value proposition is. What is it that they can offer to students? What can students expect by engaging in the program? What can they expect to get out of it? And really, what is that ultimate reason for joining? What is that really compelling goal? We work to do some development of that value proposition and really help crystallize who this program is for and what it can do. And then we really thought through activation. I think that's a really important part of this that we can kind of talk about in the conversation today, is not just, okay, great, we've made this perfect little value proposition. We know exactly who we are, what we have to offer, and who's the right fit for this. But also, okay, how do we make sure that our sales team is using that? In this case, the sales team is obviously not your traditional sales team. In this case, it's really the advisors. So the advisors that were working within the College of Engineering who had a lot of influence over students and, once they were in the college, which major they were choosing. So we worked really closely with those advisors to make sure that they knew exactly what this department was about and what they could offer. And they knew that value proposition backward and forward, and were able to use it in conversation with students, which was just a really important kind of access point or communication channel with those students. We also partnered to make sure that it was integrated across their website, in their social media channels, in their email content flows, and other kind of those big communication events, open houses, those sorts of things, to make sure that this value prop was something that was out there really consistently, and something that could be really believed and understood. And what it resulted in just its first year out, was a 40% increase in enrollment in the program. So they really took what was decline over the past several years of enrollment, and not only neutralize it, but were able to flip it around because they were able to tell this really compelling story. And it wasn't, there wasn't some big external factor that came in that all of a sudden made civil and environmental engineering as sexy or as appealing as computer science engineering, which is kind of where everyone was going. It really was attributed to this ability to kind of redefine that story and be able to tell that story in a compelling way for those engineering students.
One of the things that was really fun about doing this value prop work is, if you're familiar with the University of Minnesota at all, U of M has a very powerful, very distinctive brand. And the university as a whole is really protective of that brand, as they should be. So part of the challenge here was helping this particular school and this particular set of degree programs find a compelling value proposition, something that was going to attract students into their major, that was very complementary to the reason that those students chose University of Minnesota to begin with, didn't compete with the school's overall message, but really said, I found my way to the U of M, and now I'm going to find my way into this particular college for this particular degree program. So, University of Minnesota is out there talking about being driven to discover. It's about research. It's about discovery. It's about expanding your educational opportunities. And I think where we ultimately ended up for the CEGE team was really focused around students who want to see, do, and have an impact. So it really got to tangible results, being able to go out in the field and do work with your hands, as well as, calculations and more technology driven work, but also for looking at those students who really wanted to have an impact on their communities. So it got really tight. It got really crisp. It was super complementary to what was already going on at the U, and it was speaking the students' language. It really was talking to those students who needed to make the choice. So we think that was one of our favorite examples of this type of work, particularly because it had measurable results that happened pretty quickly. So hopefully that gives a good example as kind of a starting point. And with the pre-mumble out of the way, we would love to hear questions from the group. Who came with a good question today? right, while we're waiting to see what pops up in the chat, we did get one question ahead of time that was asking the question about who drives the process of creating a value proposition and getting the sales or admissions team on board with that work. And I think from our perspective, what we have found is it's best when there's a collaboration between the marketing folks and the sales folks, or the marketing folks and the admissions folks. And it doesn't really matter who calls the question or who is driving the process, but it has to have equal input from both sides of the house. Marketing really is responsible for the message and making sure that things are aligned with the brand overall. And sales or admissions really has an incredible responsibility in co-creating, making sure they're sharing what is working for them out in the marketplace. And also then in helping coach teams to use the tools and the resources that are developed so that there is consistency of message out there. It also works really, really well when folks who are in the field can report back and say to the marketing team, hey, this part of our messaging is working great. We love talking about students who want to make an impact. That's really resonating, and maybe less so on the want to see results piece. So can we adjust some of our materials? Can we adjust some of our talking points? So it really does need to be that give and take. It needs to be an equally balanced project. But again, either of those groups have perfectly valid reasons for raising the question, do we have a value proposition? Do we need a value proposition? And are we using our value proposition to its fullest advantage?
And I think that really applies when we think about the process of developing this value proposition. I think we've all worked with sales teams, we've all worked with marketing teams. If this was something that marketing tried to take on and kept sales out of the process and then just handed it over to sales, I think we all probably know that nothing would happen with that. You know, there would be a real disconnect in terms of, why are we doing this? Why do you think you can do my sales job better than I can do the sales job when I'm the one that's out in the field talking to folks every day? So I think just making sure that both those parties are involved is really the only way it's going to be successful at the end of the day. Nicki, what about the difference between brand or brand positioning or brand strategy and value proposition? Are those the same thing? They're different things?
They are not the same, but they are closely related. So again, in the example we already shared, we talked about how the primary brand really drives the strategy, really drives the tone, and the value proposition needs to tuck under that. So whether it is selling a specific part of the business, selling a particular product or service line, the value proposition for what you're going to market with could change. What the brand really establishes is who you are as an organization, who and what you stand up for as an organization, and sets some guidelines for what do you look like, what do you sound like, where are you going to play, and that all needs to hold. But the value proposition gets pretty specific, and the first thing that a value proposition needs to do is be customer focused. It really needs to ask and answer the question, why would a customer choose to work with our organization on this particular need, issue, or product? Value propositions also are very concise. They're typically pretty short, and they should be really clear. It should sort of answer the why we do what we do, how we do what we do, and what you get when we do those things well. And it should be evidence-based. It should be something that your organization can back up with statistics. So, you know, if you're saying your product is superior quality, hopefully you have some data that backs up longevity or low number of customer complaints, or whatever those sort of more empirical measurement points might be. So while the brand really is personality and tells the story, the value proposition is a really hard working tool that answers that question. Why should I choose these folks? Why should I choose this product? The more they work together, the stronger the package is. I will also say it's probably easier to refresh and change a value proposition than it is a brand position, because market conditions change pretty frequently. Competitors change pretty frequently. And it's easy to sort of tweak that language to take advantage of things that are happening currently in the marketplace based on world events or competitor changes, any of those sorts of things.
We did get a question that just came in, which is, have you undertaken a similar value proposition discovery process and execution for any small businesses? If so, please describe the tips to success.
Thinking about small businesses, I would say the same process applies whether it's a large organization or a small company. Probably the best example is what we do for Beehive ourselves, in really understanding how we want to tell our stories. So I would say those tips for success really are to right-size the project for the size of your business and for the scope of the audience that you're trying to reach. So, maybe instead of doing a 3 or 4 competitor analysis, you're really looking at 1 or 2 organizations that are either somebody you admire or somebody who's doing something that you would really like to emulate in the marketplace, and understanding from that perspective how you're different. But implementing the process really is the same. You kind of go through that exercise to say, why do we do what we do every day? How do we do it that's different than our competitors? And what do our customers get that's a different experience? And then making sure internally that you're always coming back to those as kind of a touch point, and making sure that you're talking consistently about how you go about those things. I would have to say, whether it's a big organization or a small organization, that consistency piece is probably the single most important thing you can do in bringing your value prop to life. Some might argue it's easier in a small organization than a big one, actually.
I can take this one. We got one in advance of the call. How do you get traction for a new value proposition? So I think the spirit of this one is, okay, so you've created a value prop. Now what? Now what do you do? Like how do you actually make it stick? And I think one thing that we've seen be really successful, I mean, this is a change, right? So having this value proposition is going to be a new way of thinking or doing or communicating for the team. So at its core, it is a change. And so what we'd like to think about in any sort of change circumstance is using change management communication best practices. So really thinking through, this isn't just a one-time launch. There's really things to be thought out during the process, which we've talked about. So making sure the right people are involved in the process, part of co-creating, because they are then going to have a greater sense of accountability for the work kind of once it's out in the world. So that's sort of the pre-process. There's the, launch, for lack of a better word, right off the bat when you're kind of initially implementing this change. And that's where it's going to be really important to be able to articulate why this value prop is important and what people can expect to change because of it, and be super clear about, what does this mean for you? What does this mean for you as a sales team member? What does this mean for our customers? And be able to articulate those things very clearly. And then as you move forward, I think what's important is to not think it's done, right? We're not complete just because we've involved people and because we've, been really thoughtful with how we roll this out. As you kind of move forward, there's a lot of important, recognition to do, and keeping it kind of this living, breathing conversation. So part of that is making sure you have a good feedback loop established. Nicki mentioned earlier, when you have the sales team really engaged and they're out in the field having these one-on-one conversations, and they're able to come back and say, this was working really well, this wasn't working so well. Let's make sure they know who to go to. Like, who do they go tell that to so that something can actually be done with it, versus someone on their team or someone else just nodding their head and being like, cool, like I'm glad that glad that worked, or glad it didn't, but nothing coming of it. So making sure that there's really clear feedback channels that are established and well understood, making sure you're maybe doing some storytelling or feedback around what's working. So maybe there's a sales team meeting up in, January or February. You have this opportunity to come together and say, this is working really well. Dan over here did a great job with this customer, and here's how it worked out. Lori did this great thing over here. So kind of recognizing those who are using it really well, giving those examples so that people who are on the team who maybe aren't as familiar can just really see how it is in action. And then I think onboarding, as you think about it, you might have this value prop that has been rolled out and is in a great place, but making sure it's a critical part of your onboarding process and making sure that team members across the board really understand the value prop is an easy one to forget because you do all this work. Everyone is so invested in it. So of course, everyone must know about it. But actually building it into your processes and things like onboarding is a good little reminder to have.
I'll just add on to that. This is not a question that came in specifically, but I think one of the things that we have encountered that is so incredibly valuable is when you start digging into the topic of a value proposition and you're trying to get really concise and you're trying to get down to maybe 3 things that are really differentiating about your go-to-market story. Doing the exercise opens up a lot of conversation. It gives people an opportunity to share their own points of view, to share what's working and what's not, and really to sort of tease out what can we all get behind that is evidence-based that really is going to drive market share. So it takes a little bit of the, well, I've always done it this way, so I'm going to keep doing it this way, or, this really only works in this region. But broadly, we're trying to drive towards something else. It gives you a really neutral territory to air out those questions and concerns and come together on something that you've created together so that there's consensus. So that opportunity to create alignment and buy-in, I think, is probably the most valuable part of the process. For me personally, I would say that might even be more valuable than the marketplace research. The marketplace research is incredibly validating most of the time, but having everybody have the chance to weigh in, share opinions, and hear their own voice in the process so that they can then get behind whatever the ultimate decision is, has just been incredibly valuable for a number of our clients.
Here's one. What types of organizations or industries benefit from this work?
All of them, I would say. I think we've talked quite a bit about the work that we've done in higher education, and that is both at the institution level, at the degree program level, and at the college or department level. So I think that is going to continue to be a trend as we look at what's happening in higher education. Student values are changing, the enrollment patterns are changing, parents are starting to have a lot more influence on who's enrolling where and what types of programs they're pursuing. So I think higher ed will continue to be sort of a leader in this work. We also have done a fair amount of this work in healthcare and healthcare adjacent spaces. So for healthcare technology companies, for healthcare insurance companies, and to some extent for systems and clinics themselves. And again, there are market drivers. There are things that are happening in the industry that make this a very timely opportunity to take a look at how you're selling your things. So it could be a regulatory change. For example, some work that we did for a healthcare benefits provider when hearing aids became non-prescription and available over the counter was to be able to help their team that had been really selling hard against a specialty benefit on hearing devices to find their new story to tell, because just in one stroke of a pen, that whole framework changed for them. So if that is something that's on your mind, if there's a regulatory situation that's coming up, if there are new competitors entering the marketplace, those are often really good times to look and see if it's time to refresh your value proposition. We also see a lot of this opportunity in professional services, and whether that is HR, accounting, any sort of a marketing or marketing agency or communications agency, there's just an awful lot of competition in those spaces, and it changes very quickly. So trying to be sharp about the types of clients that you are pursuing and how you're telling a story that's compelling based on what's important in their world. And what we see a lot is trying in those organizations is trying to make sense of the human side of the business versus the AI and the technology side of the business. And what's the right message in storytelling there? Are you an organization that's leaning heavily into tech, heavily into AI to create a customer experience, or are you still really relying on high touch human interactions? So that type of evolution often also will drive some kind of a change in your go-to-market story and how you're talking about it.
I think a two-part sort of follow-up to that, you started to touch on it. One is when should a company look at revisit their value prop? Like why go down this path? And then sort of related to that is how often? Like, is it something that should be looked at every year? Or is it something that should be, is it time agnostic? Like what is the reason to go after this and the timing behind it?
I think if you're talking about brand position overall, sort of the conventional wisdom is every 3 to 5 years, you want to take a look at your brand position and see what's changed in your industry, what's changed in your competitive set, and what's changed inside your organization. I think value proposition gives you a little more latitude to be a little more market responsive. If you are doing good business intel, if you are keeping an eye on your competitive set, and if you are monitoring your own sales and growth trends, you should have a pretty good indication of how quickly you want to or need to change your value prop. If there's something that is not working, if there's something that pops up as either an aha or a gotcha, that also can be a really good time to look at it. But I would say, generally speaking, probably 2 to 3 years on a value proposition is enough time for it to get traction in the marketplace, because that's the other thing. There is peril in changing your value proposition too often.
Yeah.
That creates confusion, it creates inconsistency, and you don't really give yourself enough time to know if something's working or not. So
not to mention like confusion or burnout from your team. Like, are we just constantly chasing shiny objects or whatever the latest trend is?
Exactly.
Versus actually sticking with something for a little bit, which is also, I suppose, why upfront creating the right KPIs and metrics to follow is an important part of a value prop and getting a new value prop out there, because we don't want it to be just easily swayed by one person out in the field comes back and says, this didn't resonate with this person, so we need to wholesale change everything or give everything another shot. I think there needs to be some agreement upfront as to what are the KPIs, how are we going to measure them, and what is our cadence of kind of thinking through this, reporting back, and making decisions and pivoting as needed.
I think measurement is a really, really important part of this story that often gets overlooked, because you do have to take time to give things an opportunity to take hold. But also those KPIs can cause a moment of reflection for us to say, that thing that we've always done, those lunch and learns or those email drip campaigns really aren't doing for us what we thought they would or what they've done for us in the past. And so we're going to need to change it up. And so having that awareness and that discipline once the value prop is out and the marketing materials have been created to bring the team back together, maybe quarterly or so, to do that analysis, share what's working, share what's not, look at some data and make those good data and anecdotally driven solutions. I think that's also an opportunity then to go back and look at what's your single source of truth for all of this work, whether it's an intranet site or a playbook that lives digitally or whatever works inside your organization. Having a place where you can clearly articulate your value prop, you can direct people easily to the tools and resources that have been created to support it. That people know where to provide feedback and they know who to get in touch with if there's a question or a concern is really, really critical, because then you're making changes and updates in one place and everybody's getting the same refreshed information at the same time versus the dreaded version control situation that can emerge otherwise.
This is a good one. How can a business validate or test a value proposition before fully launching it?
Oh,
so the first thing that came to mind for me is a client we've worked with, who a big part of their industry is having these KOLs or key opinion leaders. So I think that, similar, they're just basically kind of like target audience members or customers who have these established relationships. And I think using those folks, those people that have really good relationships, it's a great time to bring in your sales team and say, who do we know that we have these trusted relationships with that we can use to sort of tease this out or validate it. And I think that actually does two things. It's a good data point for the business to consider about the value proposition. Like, here's what our target customer says about this. It's also a nice engagement point for the sales team member to say, we're not trying to sell you something in this moment, but we'd love your input. We value and respect you as an individual, and we'd love to hear what you think. So that was kind of the first thing that came to mind for me, is using some of those personal relationships to just kind of informally validate.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And then again, depending on the size of the organization and the resources available, primary research is a great tool. Particularly if you are looking at a couple of different elements in your value proposition, or you might have a couple value propositions that go really different directions. And you're like, well, this is true and this is also true, but we don't know which one is going to land better. So independent primary research can be a really valuable tool. Our experience has been that if you want to survey a measurable audience size with a reasonable margin of error, if you're working with the right organization, you can probably design, field, and implement that research in about 4 to 6 weeks and have some really good field testing and some good data that comes back to you to help make some decisions about which direction you might want to pursue. It does add another step. But there are a number of great organizations out there that do that type of primary research. And some organizations even have that research capability in-house. So if that's something that exists inside your organization, you want to understand where those research pockets live so that you can tap into those.
I think that's a good example, going back to a question earlier about, how should a small business go about this? It's a good example of how you can scale this work for the same outcome, right? Or for the right size it, I guess, right size the work. The example I gave may be more appropriate for if you have fewer resources and time available. Maybe it's more of a one-on-one informal type of testing. If you are a bigger organization who's really investing in this, both from a time and financial perspective, maybe it is more of that kind of more robust and thorough, but still very doable primary research. Sure. All right. What are some common mistakes companies make when crafting their value propositions?
I think one of the things that we see most often and usually works itself out through the process is if there is a strong personality or a strong leader in some part of the business that comes to the table and says, this is what I want. And the validation, the input, the testing sort of takes a secondary position compared to what that leader believes to be true. Generally speaking, as we go through a process with a client and demonstrate some secondary research, what we've heard from other members of the team as we're sort of rolling up consistent themes, that tends to break down some of those barriers or real strong personal opinions. But I would say giving in to one or two strong personalities or saying this is the way we've always done it, those are probably two of the biggest pitfalls. I would say from my perspective, the other big mistake is doing all of the work up front to get the value proposition developed, do the research, validate it, test it, and then not follow through on the people side, the implementation side with really good consistency. So teaching people how to use new tools, giving them a reason why, what's in it for me to make this change. And making sure that there's some accountability, some measurement, some accountability, as well as some incentive and some reward for helping to make that change. So it's sad when you do a lot of work and you have crafted something that has a lot of potential and it just sort of sits there for lack of uptake. So I would say those are the two biggest ones for me. I don't know.
Those are good ones from from a process perspective. I'm trying to think also of the actual end product itself and the actual development of the value proposition. I think one thing we've run into is a lack of focus on your key customers.
Mm.
So sometimes when organizations want a value proposition, but it actually turns out maybe they needed to learn more about their customers first. Who are their target personas? So that when we do draft that value prop, we're not trying to be all things to all people, but instead actually focusing on the very distinct needs, motivations of our target, those, 2 to 3 target personas our companies might have for their customers, so that we can really craft something that is unique to them versus being, too general to really be effective.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's in our checklist, 3 things that are critical to a really high value proposition are 3 C's. It has to be clear what you are going to market with. It must be concise, and that's another pitfall. When the elevator pitch that's supposed to be 2 sentences turns into a manifesto, it sort of loses its value. So clear, concise, and then customer focused. And that can be tricky too, because I think just as business people in general, we're very focused on what works for us. How are we going to hit our numbers or make our metrics, and what the customer needs or what the customer needs to hear can get diluted in that process. And that's not specific to any one organization or any one industry. I think it just sort of happens, because we are pretty insulated in the work that we do every day. So really maintaining rigorous focus on what the customer experience and what the customer value is just a really good guidepost. Any other questions popping up here? Not too much else. Well, we have, I'd say about 10-ish minutes left in our scheduled time. So if there are other questions, please pop them into chat. We want to make sure that we're hearing from everybody and giving you really good value. I will say that one other thing that, is genuinely a little self-serving is that working with a third-party consultant on this type of work can often be a neutralizing effect, because like I mentioned, people come in with a lot of preconceived ideas. They think they know what works. They think they know their customer, but that opportunity to do the outside in thinking and have someone challenge common questions or commonly held beliefs in a respectful way, of course, can be pretty eye-opening, I think, for a number of organizations. I think another reason that you might want to seek outside help with a project like this is this doesn't really sit in the business as usual work of the day. Getting your publications out, scheduling your sales calls, making sure the newsletter goes out, making sure the sales meeting happens, all of those things are business as usual, but taking that moment to really pause and do some research and some reflection to look up and think bigger, and also to think future focused. Sometimes you just need an assigned team who can take a break from the business as usual to really focus on a special project like this. And because it really does have a beginning, middle, and end, that's an easy thing to peel off and give to either a special project team or to somebody outside the organization. This is last call for questions. Anything else before we wrap it up for today?
All right. Well, thank you all for joining today, and we hope you have a lovely Monday.
And this recording will be available. I think it'll be sent out to all of you who participated today, certainly to everybody who registered. And if you are looking for more information or resources, check out beehivepr.biz. We have a couple of good blog posts and some good downloadable tools there that can help if you're looking for some guidance on this kind of work. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.